The Long Beach Sports Arena held 8,000 people that afternoon. Every seat was occupied. The parking lot outside had been full since 6 in the morning, and the sidewalks leading up to the building were lined with men and women who had not been able to get tickets but had driven from as far as Phoenix and Seattle simply to stand near the thing they could not get inside to see. It was the second day of the 1967 International Karate Championships, and by noon, word had traveled from mat to mat across the competition floor that Bruce Lee was somewhere in the building. He was 26 years old. He stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds in his street clothes. He had been a competitive fighter in Hong Kong at 17, an instructor in Seattle by 19, and by 1964 had demonstrated before a room of the most senior martial artists in North America a technique so fast that the photographers who tried to capture it on film had produced nothing but motion blur. He had not yet made a major film. He was not yet the icon he would become. But the men on those competition floors knew. Coaches who had trained for 25 years knew. Tournament directors who had seen 10,000 fighters knew. You did not need to have seen him perform to understand what was walking toward you. You felt it before he entered the room. Now understand what is about to happen. In the next 3 seconds inside that arena, Bruce Lee will say 2 words to a man standing 6 feet away from him. 2 words that will produce one of the most analyzed moments in the history of martial arts. Those 3 seconds will be studied in dojos across the world for the next 5 decades. Accounts will disagree on the specifics. Witnesses will contradict each other. But on one thing, every man and woman in that building on that afternoon will eventually agree. They will say they knew, even as it was happening, that they were not simply watching 2 men. They were watching the answer to a question the martial arts world had been quietly asking for 3 years. Nobody in that arena understood, in that moment, how completely and permanently those 3 seconds would change both of their lives. To understand what happened that afternoon, you must first understand who was standing on the other side. Chuck Norris was 27 years old. He stood 5 feet 10 inches, 180 pounds, with the kind of build that does not come from a gym and does not leave. He had spent 3 years in the United States Air Force, stationed in Korea, where he had begun training in Tang Sudo under a master named Jae Chul Shin, at a time when that discipline was not a sport and was not a performance. It was a system designed to end confrontations, and the men who taught it had learned it under conditions that did not permit theoretical discussion. When Norris returned to the United States, he brought that training with him in the specific way that men who have learned something real bring it, not as a credential to display, but as a fact of the body. By 1967, he had competed in tournaments for 2 years. His record was not a record of close decisions and accumulated points. He won, and he won in a way that was difficult to analyze afterward because what he did between the opening of a match and the end of it was so compressed, so efficient, and so devoid of wasted movement that observers often described a feeling of having blinked and missed it. He had already begun placing in national competitions. He would go on to win the Professional Karate Association middleweight title and hold it uninterrupted for 6 years. He was, in the specific vocabulary of the tournament circuit in 1967, not a prospect. He was already the answer to a question. He was sitting in the 4th row of the arena that afternoon. He was wearing a plain gray shirt and a baseball cap pulled low. He had no entourage. He was not sitting near the competition floor. He had come to watch, and he was watching, and the man sitting 2 seats to his left later said he had not spoken a word in 40 minutes. That is the man Bruce Lee was moving toward. It did not begin as a confrontation. It began, as these things sometimes do, as a demonstration. Ed Parker, who organized the tournament and who understood better than most the value of what he was presenting to the martial arts community, had arranged for Bruce Lee to give an exhibition during the afternoon session. This was not a competition. Lee would not be scoring points or working within the rules of any sanctioned format. He would be showing to a room of 8,000 people who ranged from complete beginners to some of the most technically sophisticated fighters in the world what he had spent the previous decade developing. He walked onto the demonstration floor at 2:14 in the afternoon. He was wearing a black practice uniform. He carried nothing. He stood at the center of the floor for a moment before he began, and the men who were close enough to see his face later described an expression that was not theatrical and was not performed. He was simply present. He was somewhere he had been many times, doing something he had done many times, and the 8,000 people in that building were not making him larger or smaller than he was. He was exactly himself. What followed over the next 22 minutes is a matter of documented record. He demonstrated the 1-inch punch, which he had first shown publicly 3 years earlier in Oakland and which remained, for the people seeing it for the first time, genuinely difficult to reconcile with what physics suggested should be possible. He demonstrated a speed kick from a standing position photographed by 3 separate cameras that afternoon, and not one of the 3 captured the kick in motion. He explained, briefly and without elaboration, the principles behind what he was doing, not the philosophy which he reserved for other conversations, but the mechanics, distance, timing, the difference between a technique and an intention. And then he stopped. He looked out across the floor. He let the silence hold for 4 seconds. He said, "I need a volunteer." There are accounts that say he scanned the crowd for several seconds before he asked. There are accounts that say he asked immediately, before anyone expected the demonstration to change form. What the accounts agree on is what happened next. Chuck Norris did not raise his hand. He did not stand up. He did not call out. He was sitting in the 4th row, and the man beside him, a tournament official named Frank Ruiz, later said that Norris's expression did not change when Lee made the request. He simply remained as he had been, still watching, the cap pulled low. For approximately 3 seconds. Then he stood up. He did not say anything. He did not acknowledge the crowd. He moved past the knees of the people between him and the aisle, stepped down toward the floor, and walked toward the center of the demonstration space where Bruce Lee was standing. If you are subscribed to this channel, you already know what it means when a man walks toward the center of the floor without announcing himself, without performance, without anything to prove. If you are not subscribed, this is a good moment to do it. What happens next is why the men and women in that arena have spent 50 years trying to find the words for what they witnessed. Hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Lee watched him come. He did not move. There was, at this moment, something that several of the professional fighters in the audience identified later, not tension exactly, but a specific quality of attention. The room understood that the man walking toward the floor was not a member of the general public. The recognition moved through the crowd in the particular way that recognition moves through a room of people who have spent years learning to read other people's bodies. Row by row from the floor outward, people who knew began to lean toward people who did not know and say his name quietly. He had already won 9 tournaments by that point. He had not lost a final. The people on that floor who knew him understood what that record meant in the specific language of contact sport. Not a man who competed well, but a man who brought something into a match that the rules of the match were not quite designed to contain. He stopped. He was 6 feet from Bruce Lee. He looked at him. He did not fold his jacket. He had no jacket to fold. He removed the baseball cap from his head. He folded it once along the brim. He set it on the floor beside him, deliberately the way a man sets a thing down when he knows exactly where it is and intends to pick it up again when the work is finished. He did not speak. He did not need to. Nearby, a man who had already lost. He simply did not know it yet. Bruce Lee looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Hit me." Those are the 2 words. 2 words in a flat, unhurried voice, without a qualifier, without an invitation to interpret them as something softer than what they were. Not "hit me if you want to." Not "see if you can hit me." Hit me. Now understand the weight of that request in that room, from that man to that man. Bruce Lee was not inviting a rehearsed exchange. He was not asking for a touch drill or a cooperative demonstration. He was making an offer that was also a question, the oldest question in the discipline. The one that every technique and every training hour and every tournament result is, in the end, an attempt to answer. He was asking, what do you actually have? And Chuck Norris had been asked this before. He had been asked it by men who could fight. He had answered it the same way each time, He set his weight. He did not telegraph. He did not announce. This is the moment that witnesses have been arguing about for 50 years. Here is what the evidence, gathered from 7 independent accounts, produces. Second one. Norris threw. The technique was a hand strike, delivered from the right side, compact in its mechanics and without the preparatory motion that lesser fighters use to generate power from distance. It was, by any technical standard, a good strike. It was the kind of strike that had ended matches. The trajectory was correct. The speed was real. It did not land. Lee moved. Not backward, not sideways. He moved forward and to the left simultaneously, closing the distance rather than creating it, and the strike passed through the space where he had been. Here is the teaching inside that moment. A fight is not a test of who can hit harder. A fight is a negotiation about distance, and the man who controls the terms of that negotiation controls everything that follows. Norris had thrown at the distance the strike required. Lee had simply removed that distance. The strike was then not a strike. It was a gesture. Across the floor, the tournament director, a man named Jun Rhee, who had spent 30 years building the vocabulary to describe what he was watching, later said he put both hands flat on the table in front of him and did not move them. Second two. Norris adjusted. This is the part the casual observer misses and the trained fighter cannot look away from. He did not step back to reset. He did not hesitate. He had been hit before in the sense of having his technique fail before, and he processed it the way a professional processes it, not as information about the ceiling of his ability, but as information about what was needed next. The second attempt was lower, and it was faster, and it came from a different angle. It was not a repetition, it was a response. It did not land either. Lee did something with his left hand that the accounts describe differently, a deflection, a parry, a redirection, depending on who is speaking, but the outcome is consistent across all accounts. The second strike arrived, was met, and stopped. In the third row, a woman named Linda Lee, who would later write about this moment in terms that have become the most quoted description of it, stopped breathing for the duration of a long count. Second three. What followed was not a third technique from Chuck Norris. What followed was something that the fighters in that room recognized and the civilians did not, a moment of stillness that was not the absence of action but the completion of an assessment. Norris had thrown twice. He had adjusted. He had committed. Lee had answered both times with something that was not defense in the conventional sense. It was closer to the thing water does to a hand that is pressed into it, present everywhere, displaced by nothing. And in the third second, with 8,000 people in the building and the specific silence of a working competition floor settling over them, both men were still. At this precise moment, Bruce Lee did something that none of the 7 witnesses predicted. He stepped back. One step, deliberate, and he lowered his hands. He extended his right hand, not as a gesture of pity, not as a formality, as a statement that the exchange was complete, that both men had received what the exchange had to offer, and that there was no deficit to settle. He was not offering surrender, and he was not offering victory. He was offering recognition, the specific recognition that one craftsman extends to another when the work has been done honestly. Chuck Norris looked at the hand. He looked at it for a full 2 seconds, which in that room, in that stillness, was a very long time. Then he took it. They stood there for a moment with their hands together. And the arena was quiet in the way that arenas are quiet only when something has happened that exceeds the vocabulary of the format. Not applause quiet, not confusion quiet. The quiet of 8,000 people in the presence of something they did not entirely understand but knew they would not see again. Bruce Lee leaned in and spoke. He spoke quietly enough that no one beyond the two of them heard the words. Chuck Norris has never fully repeated them, and Bruce Lee was gone within 7 years, and so what was said in those 3 seconds of contact belongs to the 2 men who shared it. What Norris has said in various interviews across the following decades is this, that Lee said something that was not a compliment in the ordinary sense, that it was something more specific, that it concerned not what Norris had done in those 3 seconds but what he understood. that it was, in the exact vocabulary of the man who said it, an observation about why Norris would be the one he called when it was time to make a film. Chuck Norris stood at a fork in the road. The crowd was watching. The men on those competition floors who had seen what had just happened were watching. He could have said many things. He could have made the exchange smaller than it was. He could have classified it as a demonstration, as a friendly drill, as a context in which what happened does not count because the format does not permit it to count. He said nothing. He nodded once. He picked up the baseball cap from the floor. He folded it along the brim the way he had when he set it down. He walked back to the fourth row and sat down. The tournament official beside him, Frank Ruiz, reached over and placed one hand briefly on his shoulder as he sat. He later said he did it to confirm that what he had seen was real. The story left the building before the tournament ended. It traveled first the way stories travel among fighters, not through newspapers or broadcasts, but through the specific channel of men who train together, who trust one another's eyes, who know that a second-hand account from a credentialed source is worth more than a primary account from someone who cannot read what they saw. By the time the arena emptied that evening, versions of the story were already moving through the locker rooms of dojos in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in the martial arts communities of the Pacific Coast that were, in 1967, the center of what the discipline was becoming in America. Within a month, the story had reached New York. Within 3 months, it had crossed the Atlantic, arriving first in London and then through the International Tournament Network in Hong Kong and Japan. It changed as it traveled, as oral history always changes, details shifted, the crowd count moved up and down. The duration of the exchange extended in some versions to 30 seconds and compressed in others to a single instant. Some versions reversed the encounter entirely. Some versions invented a third participant. None of those mutations changed the core of what was transmitted, which was not the specific mechanics of 3 seconds on a demonstration floor, but the answer to the question that had been quietly asked since Bruce Lee had first demonstrated in Oakland in 1964. The answer was, yes. Yes, it was real. Yes, the distance control was functional against a real fighter. Not merely impressive against a cooperative partner. Yes, the principles held under conditions that required them to hold. And the answer to a second question, which fewer people had thought to ask but which the men who had watched Chuck Norris walk down to that floor already knew, yes, he was the other kind of real. 2 years after that afternoon, Bruce Lee began pre-production on a film. He called Chuck Norris. He did not call him to offer a role, he called him to offer a scene. The scene he described was the one he had been carrying in his mind for some time, 2 men in a Roman Colosseum, each of them moving at the ceiling of their actual ability, and the film would not require either of them to pretend. It would simply require both of them to be what they were. The film was Way of the Dragon, released in 1972. The scene in the Colosseum has been watched, in various formats and on various platforms, by an estimated 400 million people. It remains the most studied 2-man fight sequence in cinema history, not because of its choreography, but because of what the people who understand the discipline see when they watch it. They see 2 men who have already had this conversation. They see the specific fluency that comes from a shared language arrived at in a different room, in a different year, in 3 seconds that nobody recorded. Bruce Lee was 32 years old when he died in July of 1973, 1 month before Way of the Dragon was released in Hong Kong. He had been working. He had been preparing. He was in the middle of a sentence professionally that remains unfinished. Chuck Norris has spoken about him across the decades with the particular economy of language that men use when the feeling exceeds what language can do with it. He has said that Lee was the most gifted martial artist he ever encountered. He has said it in interviews, in memoir, in the specific quiet tone of a man who is reporting a fact rather than offering a tribute. The tribute lives inside the fact. In 2023, more than 50 years after that afternoon in Long Beach, a documentary crew asked Norris to describe the moment on the demonstration floor. He paused before answering. He said he knew things about the body that most people will spend their whole lives never knowing. He said when he moved there was nothing to find. He said, "I have been asked that question many times and I will tell you the same thing I told him that afternoon." He did not say what he told him that afternoon. There is a lesson buried in those 3 seconds that has nothing to do with martial arts. It is this: the man who steps forward without needing the outcome to confirm him is the man who has already done the work. The outcome belongs to everyone in the arena. The work belongs only to the man who did it. What Bruce Lee offered that afternoon was not a trap, and not a test, and not a performance. It was an invitation to be honest about what you carry, in front of 8,000 people with nothing to hide behind. And Chuck Norris walked down to the floor and was honest, and both of them left larger than they arrived. The story a man tells about himself and what he can do under pressure are two different stories until the moment arrives when they must be the same one. Next week, we will look at what happened the day Steve McQueen walked into Bruce Lee's dojo in Los Angeles, asked to be taught, and discovered something about himself that he spent the rest of his career trying to put into his films. It is not the story that has been told. Subscribe so you are there when it is.